one important aspect is there that if you work in science, you need to be very intrinsically motivated. The motivation comes from yourself, and you really want to achieve the goals that you often set yourself. Many deep tech startups are just extended research labs, and this second part of the mindset is not there. So they do maybe great science, but they miss the commercialization part. This is why actually then we turned it into a business model where we said we build full-blown quantum computers, full-stack quantum computers, and we sell them. This is our product, and we sell them. And in the end, I think it was a good move because it also differentiated us from the business models that especially the big US players are pushing. Almost all technologies you can use in different ways, right? If you think about your kitchen knife, you can use it to cut tomatoes and you can use it to stab someone in the back. But this doesn't mean we stop producing kitchen knives, right? So in the end, it's the question is how do we use it, right? And what are the rules of the game? What matters a lot is that when you act consciously, there's basically certain purpose behind it. So you don't just do random things, but there is, at least in your head, there is a plan, and you try to follow this plan, and this plan gives you purpose and makes you feel good as a human.
Welcome to another episode of the Quantum Economy Podcast. Today I'm joined by Jan Goetz, co-founder and co-CEO of IQM Quantum Computers, one of Europe's flagship quantum hardware ventures. We'll look at how to scale a deep tech company from lab to market, why our product mindset matters, and IQM's approach to superconducting qubits and co-design. We explore where quantum might in near future make a real impact, from pharma and batteries to AI. And we look at Europe's innovation landscape and the ethics of exponential technologies, and whether quantum might one day unlock the mysteries of life and consciousness. Here is the Quantum Economy Podcast with Jan Goetz. So Jan, before we get into the technical parts on IQM and quantum computing, I just want to ask you one very, very simple question. When I'm looking at the IPOs in Germany in particular, the tech development, the startups that have come out, that have raised money, they have been followers of technologies of the past, copy in the US, and it seemed like Europe had been lagging behind. All of a sudden, you have founded one of the most exciting tech companies in Europe and the most well-funded companies in the deep tech scene in Europe. How do you build a startup like that in Europe? What is a little bit of background on your journey and how you managed to have that vision and to raise the money for this company?
Yeah, of course, quantum computing is a very hot topic these days, and there are big efforts around the world. But most of these efforts actually come out of science labs, university labs, which is also the case for us. And most of the founders actually have a scientific background. And I think one important aspect is there that if you work in science, you need to be very intrinsically motivated. The motivation comes from yourself, and you really want to achieve the goals that you often set yourself. And I think this is a very important factor also when building a company. Of course, you have investors in the background and other stakeholders, but ultimately, especially in the early phase, stuff only gets done if you really do it. And I think that's super important that you have this kind of founder mentality and you push things forward. And in our case, actually, I was lucky that I'm not the only founder. There have been 4 founders for IQM, and we were all pushing really, really hard. So it's a lot of hard work, a lot of dedication. And then, of course, also you need a little bit of luck and strong support from the outside. And I think in our case, all of this somehow came together. And this is why we managed actually to scale IQM to now what I think is Europe's largest effort when it comes to building quantum computers. But of course, we didn't do this alone. So yeah, there were many people in the background who have supporting us in this journey.
Yeah. Now, I mean, because you're right. I mean, there are a lot of breakthrough science, and the academia is very strong throughout Europe, I would say. But then when it comes to setting up company and building companies and also having that commercial vision for a company, then there is a challenge. So there is a hype around simple business models. But if you go to deep tech and you have like a long-term path, are there some learnings, like you could say, for if you were to recommend setting up a quantum tech or a deep tech company from a spin-off from academia or science today? What are some learnings that people can take away from your journey so far?
Yeah, that's totally correct. I think having this strong motivation is only one piece of the puzzle, and you can be a very motivated scientist, but still maybe not be the best entrepreneur, because there's another kind of mindset thing that you need to have, which is this kind of product focus. So you want to build something that becomes a product where other people are actually interested in buying it from you. And I think many deep tech startups are just extended research labs. And this second part of the mindset is not there. So they do maybe great science, but they miss the commercialization part. And also here, I think in our case, we had this from the very beginning. So when we started in 2019, we already made plans that we would sell quantum computers very early on. And some people called us crazy. They said, why would anyone buy, let's say, a 5-qubit quantum computer? There's no use whatsoever. But we were pushing it through anyways. And even though you cannot use these systems from a commercial perspective, you can use them still to do science, to do education and other topics. And I think this mindset that we now have in the company, that every R&D that we do needs to end up in a product or a product feature. This has helped us tremendously in scaling the company because it has helped us in creating revenue. This revenue then in turn helped us to attract more investment, and then it becomes this kind of flywheel. So it's not only the motivation and the drive that you need as a deep tech founder, but it's also this kind of product mindset and the wish to commercialize your technology.
Yeah, I think that is like not very typical to have that tangible revenue to get fuel and to get scaling. So I'm very intrigued by how you did that. And also you chose very early to also put a lot of your emphasis on building hardware on the physical and not to emphasize like the optimization of cloud solutions as some of your big competitors are more emphasizing. How did that come to be? What was because you look at a company where you have that physical physical quantum computer, that was probably also one of the strategic decisions that you took then.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at my technical background and also the other founders, we all have a chips background. So this is where we did our research. And if you look at the initial, let's say, the pitch that we did during our seed round, it was more like trying to become maybe the Intel of quantum computing, so really focus on the chip side. But then if you think it through and if you want to commercialize it, then the question is who would buy a chip? If there's no system integrator, nobody buys your chips. And there was no system integrator in quantum because it was such an early phase of the industry. And this is why actually then we turned it into a business model where we said we build full-blown quantum computers, full-stack quantum computers, and we sell them. This is our product and we sell them. And in the end, I think it was a good move, because it also differentiated us from the business models that especially the big US players are pushing. And you always need to have a differentiator. And I think this is something that makes us special. We are meanwhile the company that I think globally has sold most on-premise computers worldwide.
That's amazing. So, but you also, really early, you outlined a roadmap for progress. And you've been delivering on milestones, at least, in the range that you had predicted. And that is like also something in the tech scale where people oversell and overhype. And how did you come to that roadmap? And how are you so secure that you can deliver going towards your vision for, just to take the 1 million qubit as your baseline for that scaling factor? What is your confidence and what do you base that on?
Yeah, I mean, this is a very tricky question, I think, for each tech founder. When you, on the one hand side, make these roadmaps and promises towards investors, and then on the other side, of course, these roadmaps are also then kind of documents that are inside the company because the engineers need to deliver. And for me, it was always a guiding principle and a very important point that I don't want to tell two different stories. And from this perspective, the way we did the roadmap was always that there was a kind of a pull factor coming more from the investor side. And of course, also customers and others want to see ambitious roadmaps because they want to have the leading technology. But then always kind of the diligence of our engineering team and the challenge they have been challenging than the roadmap that was requested from the other side. And from this, I think we have managed to develop on the roadmap that is very ambitious on the one hand side, but actually that has the full buy-in of our engineers. And if these people believe they can do it, because these are some of the most clever people on Earth. So from this perspective, this is always the way we have been doing it, in an approach that brings basically both stakeholders to the table and then make sure there is an alignment across the whole organization.
But it's interesting when you talk, because you are listing a lot of leadership principles. You come from the sciences and you look at how to build a company, and whatever industry is, you get your buy-in from your people, the stakeholders, and to deliver on the milestones. And also I would be curious, like, you have been able to raise a lot of money for a Finnish, German, European tech company. Can you let me know some of the secrets and the learnings that you had throughout that journey?
Yeah, I mean, fundraising, of course, is always a complex process and not a very predictable process, and also a process that changes kind of during the lifetime of the company. So in the very early phases, when you usually attract these kind of deep tech venture capital funds, then it's all about the team, the vision. So you want to build something really great, and of course the technology that's behind it. But there's maybe not so much focus on the business model and the financials. And I think here in the beginning, we had a very strong team. So as I said, we had the 4 founders, but something else that we did is basically we went around in our network and we said, hey, we are going to found a company, and if we get the money, will you join us? And we did this with very trusted people, really great engineers. So we had a group of around 20 people in the background who said, yes, if you get the money, we will come and join. So we had a super strong team, which was very important for the investors. And then, of course, we had great technology. So the ecosystem in Finland, especially for superconducting technology, is super strong. The labs where we span out from, it exists since the early 60s. So there's lots of IP, lots of know-how. So this is kind of what convinced the early stage investors. But then to raise these larger rounds, which came later on, there actually we needed to show then some commercial traction. Some of these funds, they have really hard requirements. So for example, they want to see at least 10 million euros in revenue or something like that. And this was only possible because we have been focusing so much on the commercial part and selling the products. And from this perspective, I think it was a learning curve along the lifetime of the company. And the pitch, of course, has changed. And each fundraising is different. And currently we're going through a fundraising, which is again a bit different than the previous ones. So it's a lifelong learning, so to say. For a founder, you need to transform yourself all the time. And this is something that's, of course, also very interesting for me.
No, it's fascinating. And also one thing that struck me the first time I started to look into your company, actually with 2 things. The first thing that struck me was that for a quote unquote science spin-off, you had a really cool brand. And having my marketing and brand background, it looked like kind of sort of a typical US company. There was the Apple flair of the design of the products. You'd emphasize the logo and everything that was around it kind of sort of didn't feel like some of these more clunky spin-offs from academia. And also to that second point, you've been traveling to a lot of conferences. So I run into like a random conference in the Austrian mountains, and you've been speaking at all conferences that are not like the science conferences. So I would also be curious about your thoughts on the importance of the brand and your PR marketing activities. That seems not very typical for like how things have used to be been done in Germany and in Europe in general. Kind of, I mean, Nokia is obviously from Finland and an outlier with Spotify and so on. But I was just curious to hear about your thoughts, how that came to be.
Yeah, I mean, first on the design part, of course, I mean, we have very Nordic values, not only in terms of leadership values and flat hierarchies and these things, but then something that is particularly important, especially in the Finnish culture, is this design thing. If you look at the university where we span out from, Aalto University, the name Aalto is actually an architect. And the university is a merger of 3 universities, the engineering school, the business school, and the design school. And this already tells you a lot. And this means that also for our product, it was always clear we want to have super cool design. And actually, if you come to visit us, we have a showroom where we show lots of stuff. And we also show the very first design of the quantum computer, which was done with an industrial designer. Before we even had the technology ready, we had already the design. So this has always been very strong focus. And yes, we want to build a super cool brand. And I think that's important. And I think this is something where we are missing out big time in Europe compared to the US, is this whole marketing and branding. And of course, I'm trying to push this. And as you said, I try to be quite vocal and I try to be in the right places. And for me, the right places are not only the science conferences. The scientists, I think, are convinced already anyways. They want to build a machine that no one ever has built before. But I think whom we need to convince are the other stakeholders, the end users, of course, the funders, so either investors or also then on the public side, the governments, the media. And this is something that's very close to my heart, to make sure that the story is being told in a simple and understandable way to those stakeholders who don't necessarily have a quantum PhD.
No, it's interesting. And I wanted to start there because that's the things that I looked at when I started to look at IQM. And then also there were so many things that I said, well, this is a company that gets it. And when I say that, I mean it from my viewpoint, how to build a company. So I was just very curious to learn more about that journey. And also a little bit on the technical side. So you've been having breakthroughs and progress, and you've been communicating that along the roadmap. What are like surprises that you see in terms of the development of quantum computing in general? Are there things that have surprised you when you look back at the last 5 to 6, 7 years?
Well, maybe start with a positive surprise is that, well, when you are deep in the technology, you only see challenges and everything is very hard. And when we started, we barely had qubits working and maybe did the first 2 qubit gates, which was already very hard. So from an engineering perspective, you see these kind of big mountains that you wanted to climb and you didn't know actually how to get up there. And actually the positive surprise is that if you put the right focus and the right people in place, they will solve all of those engineering challenges. And this is something that we have seen across the industry. So it's not only us, many other companies have been putting out roadmaps and are delivering on their roadmaps. And this is why I'm quite confident that it's not this story that often happens in deep tech where people say it's always 10 years away and again 10 years away. You see this with other technologies. But actually in quantum, there are even very reliable surveys out there which show that the timing gets closer. And this is because of basically all the great engineering teams around the world who have been delivering. So this is one thing. The other thing is, I think, the speed now that has been picked up, especially by some of the US companies. If you look at not only the big names like Google and IBM, who obviously have big budgets, but if you look at some of the companies which are stock listed, they've been raising huge amounts of money. And still 1 or 2 years ago, many people have been talking about a quantum winter. But if you look now, it doesn't look at all like a quantum winter. It looks like kind of quantum hot summer, so to say. And I think these are some of the surprises along the journey that I had.
So, but do you think the current valuations of the new quantum tech listed companies is just? Because, I mean, we have never seen, from stock listed company, we have never seen a gap between, revenue and the multiples for the valuation that you have. I mean, AI and cloud computing was big gaps. We obviously saw what happened there. With quantum, it seems it's like a double exponential, development in everything we see. So do you see that these valuations are just, or do you think that it's also a bit overhyped?
Well, I think the market is paying the price, so I guess it's a fair price that is currently there because the market sets it. But of course, if you compare then the multiples to other industries, indeed, they are quite attractive. But I think one thing to consider is that usually the price or the valuations are a little bit the expectation into the future. And this means that if we look into the future, one big thing that is still to come is this so-called quantum advantage moment, where the quantum computer produces the commercial advantage. So the interesting fact is that all the revenue that is being made today by us and most of those companies are actually government contracts. So it's kind of pre-commercial still. And I think what we see maybe in these valuations is a fact where people believe in the quantum advantage, and they believe that once this moment comes, the revenues, they will just explode. So maybe it's a little bit a contribution into the future there that we see.
Yeah, no, it's obviously that, but like with quantum, it seems that it's like a very, very big gap, and it's very interesting because, as you also, obviously know and mention, is that the implications when you have the quantum advantage, that there are use cases that are so big that it's obviously justified. But I would also be curious about your take on these companies then. So with your superconducting qubits approach and comparisons to other ways to build quantum computers, where do you see, or let me rephrase that, what do you think are promising approaches, and what do you see as more challenging approaches out of the, I would say, 6, 7, 8 different approaches to building quantum computing?
Yeah, and I think here we need to differentiate two things. One thing is what can already be done today to build the market and the supply chain and the adoption. And the other thing is what will work long term, maybe 10 years or so. Mm-hmm. And I think today it is clear that there are a few platforms where you can run algorithms. Superconducting is one of them. But of course also trapped ions are quite strong. And to a certain extent, people start doing stuff on cold atoms as well. So I think these are the platforms that currently see traction also in the market. And if you look at some of the kind of more commercial deals that are being announced, they are usually around those platforms. And then the other question is, what is going to scale? And here, again, I think there are two aspects to it. One is the technology. So which technology can actually deliver, let's say, 1 million qubit or 1 billion qubit system? And the other question is, which is the technology that can do this also on a commercially viable way, because you don't want to kind of spend billions of dollars on such a computer, right? So from this perspective, it's really hard to say on the technology side, because all technologies have challenges, and I believe most of them can be solved. But I think this commercial aspect is often overlooked. And here, actually, if you think that quantum computers will mainly be used in big data centers, computing centers, you will probably not see them so much in your pocket as a smartphone or under your table as a desktop computer. So there, it's all about the operational costs of these data centers, so basically the energy consumption. And this means the energy consumption is basically the power that you bring into the system, where superconducting approaches have the big advantage that they can use control systems also with superconducting technology, and they work in the, let's say, nanowatt per channel. This is one thing, so very low power consumption. And the other thing is very fast gate speeds. So the algorithm, the runtime is very short, and this means overall the electricity bill for a superconducting machine will just be orders of magnitude lower than with much slower technologies like trapped ions or cold atoms. And this is why I think even if all of those technologies can scale to a certain extent, the commercial argument is the one that will be the winning or decisive factor in the end. And this is where I have strong beliefs in the superconducting technology.
No, that's a very strong argument that I share. And also, talk a little bit about your co-design approach. I mean, how you look at the structures, also how the interplay is, and how you chose to go beyond the strict hardware approach.
Yeah, I mean, co-design basically means that you design your system hand in hand with the algorithms and application to make the best use of it. And this can happen on different levels, actually, in the stack. So we have been doing this, for example, on the chip itself, so the chip architecture. And we have been designing novel chip layouts, which, for example, allow you to run certain error correction codes much more efficient. So the way we are going to implement error correction with these QLDPC codes, it's going to be 10 to 20 times more hardware efficient than, for example, the surface code that some others are using. So this is one thing where we get a lot of performance out of the system. Another thing is, if you go higher up in the stack, we do think that quantum computers will not be a standalone device that replace all computers, but it will actually be a hybrid system where the quantum computers works hand in hand with GPU clusters, maybe CPUs and memories. And we have been doing a lot of co-design work there on the software side and how to integrate a quantum computer into a supercomputing setup. And some of our customer deliveries are actually physically located in these big supercomputing centers, and we have been designing the workflow and the schedulers and all of this together with the customers to make sure that these hybrid systems work together.
Yeah, I was also referring more to the latter because, as I understand, you're also then looking at commercialization on the application layer and also in the middleware and building beyond the hardware. You're also looking at various offerings there, right? So, I mean, can you mention a couple of things that you look at like promising in like a near midterm in terms of industries and use cases that you see now that you could say with a strong conviction that this is going to be a huge market?
Yeah, I mean, internally, we focus on 3 fields. This is where we have algorithm developers in-house. Of course, we partner with many companies also in other fields, but the 3 where we have the internal conviction are the simulation on the one hand side, so using a quantum computer to simulate mainly quantum physics, and this would be applicable in the pharma industry, material science, chemistry, and the likes, molecular design, for example. And obviously, there are huge markets behind all of those. We are, for example, we're doing a project on battery development with Volkswagen as one of the examples there. So this is one field where we believe in. The other field is the field of optimization. And of course, optimization problems you find across industries, right? You find them in finance, you find them in logistics, supply chains, and the like. And we're doing quite a lot work there. And then the third one, which is obviously super hot, is the topic of AI, particularly the machine learning. And we do a lot of work in reinforcement learning, quantum machine learning. So these are the 3 fields where we are actively ourselves, but obviously there's much more security and some others to be mentioned.
I mean, security is an obvious one for obvious reasons, but it's a short-term case that you got to get it secure. So I think, if you go back only 2 years, there was a lot of emphasis on, QKD and post-quantum cryptography and the whole lessons around security. And now it feels like companies are transiting more to, we're not a quantum security company, but we're just a security company. And in that offering, in that stack, you obviously has to be, post-quantum secure. So it's very interesting to see how the industry then develops, because it seems also like from a commercial side that after the GPT moment and the scaling of AI, that now also in the quantum offerings, AI seems to play a very substantial role. So what could be other fields that you don't foresee today that could be very exciting, that could, where you could be surprised? Do you have a hinge or something that you think could be new ways to apply quantum technologies?
I mean, naturally, all the fields that we right now explore are fields where companies, like end-user companies, have already strong tech teams in-house because they've been playing. But I think there are many industries which probably don't even think about quantum because it's so far away from them. And I think as quantum computing becomes more and more, let's say, a commodity, or let's say it's really integrated in all the main workflows, we will probably see use cases in industries which are very far away from the technology side. And of course, one thing could, for example, be the public sector, which is a huge sector, and the administration. I think there are many complex problems to be solved there, optimization problems. I don't know if anyone, let's say, in the government thinks about quantum computing from a use case perspective. Of course, many of them think about it from a strategic perspective. The same goes, I think, on the educational side. It's a huge sector as well. The whole gaming sector, I think, could be super interesting. And I think there are many sectors where quantum computing right now doesn't play a role, but probably will be applied in the future.
But when you say gaming, then what are the borders then? I mean, we are having games that are then indistinguishable from our perceived reality. And what are like the borders to this technological race then? Where do you see the limitations of applying algorithms in relationship to quantum computers with millions or billions of qubits. Do you see any technical limitations to progress, or do you think progress is infinite?
I think in the end, it's a money question. If you throw enough money on the problem, I don't think there is a limit. The question is, does it make sense to throw that much money on the problem? And this basically, it's a trade-off between what is the market behind the use case on the one hand side, and how expensive is it to build such a machine? I think there are certain, let's say, use cases, if you wish, like the code breaking, which are probably so important that certain governments will push it through no matter what. But this might then be a very dedicated machine just for this use cases. This would be, for me, the worst case scenario for quantum computing, that it kind of ends up there, that it's just a very specific machine, which is for some strategic reasons developed for something very special. The best case scenario, obviously, is that really this universal quantum computers, they work at very low costs, very kind of low energy rate, and you will find them integrated everywhere. And of course, there are intermediate scenarios where maybe, for example, in pharma, for molecular design, you would find a special machine, or then for some other use cases which have significant markets behind. So I think this is a little bit the the spectrum of scenarios that we have going forward. I don't foresee a scenario where quantum computing will collapse and fail completely. I don't think that's going to happen.
But do you think it can unleash the potential to understanding fundamental philosophical questions like life and nature and consciousness?
Well, for sure, I think it will help. The question is, how far can we get? But at least there are questions like, where are quantum effects happening, and things like this, and how. There are also kind of questions: how big of a quantum system can you build? There's this, for example, this famous double slit experiment where you have an electron going through two slits at the same time, and then you can ask the question: how big of a particle can you throw at it, and still it goes through both? Obviously, a football doesn't go through both, and I think there are such kind of questions where quantum computers can help. And I think the more we understand also the fundamental physics behind it, and the more we understand maybe also some of the physics that happens in our brain or elsewhere, I think the more we will see these technologies merge together.
Do you think our brain is a quantum computer?
Not in the way we think of quantum computers, no. But I think there are interesting effects happening in the brain.
Phenomena in the brain, yeah. I mean, classically, that's not classically, but how quantum computers are built today, obviously the stability and the cooling effect is not given in our brain. So there must be something else going on. But it's very interesting to think about, because when you look at, and this is also how I come at technology, when you look at 80 years of exponential progress, and I totally resonate with what you say, you throw money at it. So if there is an incentive for money and people to work on a particular problem, we seem to have progress. And, I was very fascinated by David Deutsch way back then, at the beginning of Infinity. And I think about, we have an infinite potential to build better problems. But then if you spin that further into the future, that's why I asked you about the limitation, what are the limitations? So to me, it seems as though most of these challenging questions, once we, find new materials and, enhance the periodic table, and we come up with some more efficient ways to store and distribute energy, and we have some decentralized systems, and we have locality on some of these superpowers, then, what are the limitations? So maybe we are on a path where we are explorative and projecting progress, but we are also thinking a lot more about, other things that we should maybe not do. Do you see some risk to this race towards a quantum advancement, on also in terms of the exponential progress that we are seeing when we look at scenarios with, however we want to define AGI or superintelligence? Do you see these as big risks, or are you just hoping for progress?
Almost all technologies you can use in different ways, right? If you think about your kitchen knife, you can use it to cut tomatoes and you can use it to stab someone in the back. But this doesn't mean we stop producing kitchen knives, right? So in the end, it's the question is, how do we use it, right? And what are the rules of the game? And so from this perspective, I don't think we should ever stop technology or technological progress because we are afraid that someone would use it in the wrong way. I think we should make sure as a society that we have proper rules in place on how to use it, and that we don't use it against anyone and in a, let's say, non-moral or unethical way. I think that's important, but the technology itself should never stop, and the progress should never stop, and we should not be afraid of certain use cases which could be misused. We should then rather focus our effort on making sure that we have these rules in place, because we cannot stop technology. And if we don't develop it, someone else will develop it. And then the question is, do we rather have it ourselves, or do we rather have someone else having it? And so from this perspective, I don't think there is a reason to be afraid, more the other way around. I think we should step up and say, hey, okay, this might happen. So what do we do to prevent this from happening?
So when you say we are the Finnish people should have all of it, or some Germans, yeah.
I mean, as a society, right? And of course, this is a big topic right now, also on a geopolitical level. The question is, who are the right actors in these games? And of course, that's never easy, especially when you come out of science and you have been collaborating with researchers from around the world, actually, no matter what the passport was. But nowadays, we live in slightly different worlds, and the we actually becomes maybe less inclusive than it was a few years ago. But that's actually, it's a very important question also. Whom do we mean by we? Actually, that's a very important question.
Yeah, because if you look at Europe, historically speaking, we've had some times where we weren't the one like raising the flags on values and ethical decisions. And so I think, when societies develop, there seems to be like throughout the world, people, when they're born, they're not born to stab people in the back with a knife. They are gifted two opposable thumbs, and they learn to build tools, knives and stuff, and then they learn to cut tomatoes and whatever. But the challenge, I think, is how could you co-develop the trust between the regions, and I think we also need to break up a lot of that division, that there is a race to protect or race to dominant, because then we are obviously in a goal scenario where we have finite goals. And to me, it seems that this technological revolution that we are seeing, the digital tsunami that is now coming upon us and is not behind us, is different than previous paradigms. To me, it seems like we built technologies where we messed up. We created a nuclear bomb, but we decided not to blow up humanity because we know it was an existential threat. Even throughout the 80s, Gorbachev did not push the red button, right? We started to play with cloning human beings, figured out that's not a good idea, so we agreed that that's not super smart. To me now, it seems like there's a different challenge, and I always use the example of like the chess game. So when Magnus Carlsen, the now number one in chess, was playing the world championship, he had adapted an AlphaZero move. So he was playing the world championship and he played a move, and Stockfish, the supercomputer, said, oh, he's losing, and every expert and every brain on our planet said, well, that was a stupid move and it's wrong and he's going to lose. And then 6-7 moves later, he was winning. And afterwards, he was then asked, so what did you play there? What kind of strategy was that? What was the goal towards whatever? So then he said, I have no idea. I just played it because AlphaZero plays it and it wins. So what I want to say about that is that basically we are creating like now a technology where we don't comprehend and understand the implications. So what I think about is, can we then error correct? So even though if we have the right intention, we might having misalignments on these super technologies that we build because they are not to be comprehended by humans. So that's a scenario that I think about in terms of like just developing for the sake of progress that is different this time around. Do you share that thought or?
Yeah. Generally, I think it's an interesting thought, and I mean, if you think about AI, I think a lot of this might be happening there because we don't understand what is inside these models. These are like black boxes, right? And there, maybe we get answers, and we don't know why this answer works. With quantum, we're not quite there yet. Most of the stuff we have real algorithms which follow some logic, which are derived from, let's say, first principles or so. So with quantum, we're not there yet. I'm not saying this will never happen with quantum, but it's at a much earlier stage. But of course, building very powerful machines might lead to this effect. But then also you can say that basically in nature, there always have been effects where people were wondering why this is happening and they didn't have the right theory for it, and we try to find explanations. So maybe then we just need to become more curious and try to find models to do this. So again, I think even though it might be so that we create solutions that we don't understand, we shouldn't stop there, but then we should rather put more effort on explaining them or understanding them. I think this would be the better approach because, as said, I don't think technology will stop, and if we don't do it, someone else will do it anyway. So this is, for me, almost like a kind of rule of law, so to say.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And therefore, Florian, as you know, that I've been writing with over the past years, we thought a lot about this in essence to like creating an externalized super machine, bliss, immortality, divinity out of the machine, the Deus ex machina, the God scenario, or building some kind of externalized super intelligence that has recursive learning and just is build on some kind of quantum computing capacities to just skyrocket and just explode into some super intelligence. And I think personally that that's a very risky scenario, because even though if we get together and wanted to be creative and think about it, we don't have the brain power that, so what we believe is that we are coming to a phase when we get additional computational power that we will hack biology and chemistry and understand these underlying laws and nature in general, and we come up with what we call artificial human intelligence. So I'm a strong believer in the mensch and the power that we have as an entity, as we have agency, that we can reflect on things, we can reflect on thoughts, we can feel something, we have an inner life, if you like, the qualia, the conscious experience. And it feels like this is something that could be somewhat unique still to a human being, and keeping that to align on values and to coexist, I think becomes utmost important right now. So what I think is that instead of creating all these externalized technologies, we should start thinking about how to evolve as a species and to take biological substrates and to start to replace and also not merge with technology, because we risk overwriting something that we do not understand from first principle, but we create out of the point of being a human being, a mensch, so that we build on top of that. And I think that is, to me, because I'm not dystopian, but I'm not so optimistic that the speed of change is good for humanity. And therefore, I think there are other ways to think about how to evolve, so that we, as a species, need to undergo some kind of controlled evolution. You have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think this speed argument is a valid one. I think if you look at the history of humankind, let's say the time scales have been thousands of years usually between major, let's say, breakthroughs or development steps, and now things are happening so fast. And let's say since the beginning of 1900, so many kind of revolutionary technologies have been developed. And I would share maybe a little bit this view that for humans this can be too fast, and the question whether we keep control over it. Maybe if we don't manage to then explain the technology well and control the technology well, maybe there will be some kind of revolution, but coming from the humans trying to stop it because they are afraid. So I think this is maybe a little bit the risk, that we start doing stupid things as humans because we are too afraid of what's happening and the speed there, and we are kind of destroying a lot of the technology breakthroughs that we have been developing. At least my view is that this would happen rather than AI taking over completely. I think is that humans start destroying technology just to prevent this from happening.
Yeah, as long as we have that agency, I think we're in a good place, right? But I mean, coming back to that, consciousness, if it's computational or non-computational. So if the physicist, you say, okay, I'm a materialist, there is like physicalism, and obviously it's computational. So if leaving out the argument of some kind of different dimension, some other physics or some spiritual belief, or some crazy ideas that, like Donald Hoffman, that think that consciousness is fundamental and reality emerges out of consciousness, which is obviously also a theory. Then the argument then becomes, if we start to merge with technology and have, the brain wired up, is there something that could be overwritten, right? So even though you say you could try to control it and you can have a revolution, what if like consciousness is beyond our brain and we would just like replace 83 billion neurons and we would have a cloud computer that we are linked up to. We have absolute knowledge. We have the perfect mechanism of a humanoid robotic, and we're just walking around and there's no conscious experience. So it's like a zombie apocalypse. Then obviously we couldn't turn it off, right? So these are philosophical implications when you spin this technology further. And what I want to say with that is that I'm a true possibilist, and I think everything is possible in that technological realm. I just think that the race now is so that if we don't understand it from first principle, we are in a place where there's a different type of transformation, revolution, upgrade ahead of us that goes beyond anything we've seen in humanity. It changes, life, our understanding of reality, and I just sense that you are very optimistic about that, without having that sense of urgency also to think about the possible implications. You mentioned regulation and also like to reflect on, should we do everything, right?
I mean, I think also, again, this example that you give, I think something where maybe I would draw a red line is this free will thing. So what do we do? And also there, I think in history, there have been cases, if you think about the propaganda in the Third Reich and what it did with people and their actions. So I think technology has been used to manipulate how people kind of act. And we should never do this, I think. And this would be, for me, a red line where we start controlling brains with technology. I think people should keep their free will. And from this perspective, I'm not saying that in each and every scenario everything will be all right. It's again this example I gave with a knife is how do we use the technology? And if we as a society say, okay, we're not going to do it because it's stupid, then I think it should be okay. But of course, there are ways that technology could be used to create these more dystopian scenarios as well. And then it's up to us and especially, let's say, leaders and thought leaders to make sure that we are developing in the right direction. Okay,
we had a little detour in reality. So we'll circle back to IQM just to get that closed out a little bit. And what do you think about like the future for Europe and Germany and also Finland in terms of economical outlooks? Now that you look towards the US, you're also, you said you have a branch in the US. It's obviously a big market for you also. Do you look also for a promising industrial or economical future for Europe?
I mean, that's what we have to strive for. And of course, there are many people who are doubtful that this will happen. But again, I don't think this should mean that we stop fighting for it. And I'm fighting quite a lot that this will happen. And I think what I see, at least at the highest level, that there is now at least the will to do it. Europe has just published, for example, a quantum strategy, and there's supposed to be a quantum act coming. And I think the positive news here is that my understanding is that this is not going to be a regulative act like we have seen in AI, but it's going to be more like an empowerment act with real money inside. So I think there are some learnings from the past, and there is a political will. I'm talking, of course, also to kind of industry leaders, and there's also a kind of a strong will to make sure that in new technologies which go beyond AI, we don't repeat mistakes from the past. So I think the will is there, and now the challenge is, and this is obviously a big challenge for Europe, is on the execution side, right? We have had always good ideas, but then often we failed in execution. This means we have to get it right this time, for sure. And it requires a lot requests a lot of hard work. It requests a lot of people kind of being aligned and not fighting against each other. Even in Europe, I think even if we say we are all kind of pulling in the same direction, if you drill down, often you see that certain member states, of course, try to push for their opinion. So I think maybe at some point then we have to take a step back and have the kind of greater good in mind rather than our particular interests. But if we do all of this, I think we do have a chance. And Europe is a big market. And from this perspective, I'm an optimist, as you said already. So I think we just have to push it through.
That's good. So give me some outlooks then on IQM. What is there to expect, near future, and then in today's time, we could think about long future being 5 years ahead. What are we going to expect of the company? Where will you be when we talk in 1 year, 3 years, 5 years?
Yeah, so as we discussed in the beginning, we have been focusing a lot on chips and then systems. Going forward, you will see much more activity also on the software side. And what we're going to build is a developer platform. They are being very open, very modular, very transparent. For me, this is a missing piece still. There's lots of algorithm development going on. There's lots of hardware development going on, but this kind of middleware, the developer community is missing. And this is something that in the, let's say, next year or so, we are going to push quite strongly. And this goes together also then with a global expansion strategy. So we want to be much more active in the US, as you mentioned already. Also, we see a lot of traction in APAC. Then if you go a little bit beyond this, I think we will still push our current business model of selling these on-premise computers into supercomputing centers a lot. But we will blend in also more cloud activity there. So I think there will be more cloud activity also from us going forward. And this together, I think we have a good business plan to bring us to profitability within, let's say, these 3 to 5 years that you mentioned. So this is really the goal that we are having as a company to become big. Of course, we need more funding. So this is also something to expect, bigger funding rounds going forward. And then, of course, we are observing quite actively what's happening at the public markets and make our minds around that.
Mm-hmm. So you'll be IPOing over the next couple of years?
I don't know, no decision has been made, but what we do see is that these companies which are on the public markets, they have been raising big amounts of money in the last months, and they have been using the relatively high share price also to drive mergers and acquisitions. So we do see certain, let's say, positive points of being a public company. Of course, there are also positive points of being a private company, and this is what we have to weigh against each other.
Yeah, but I think you're addressing a valid point, though. It is a market where it seems like the big pockets buy everything they want, and there is a big race if you cannot come up with that scale capital. And I really much admire your work for addressing scale capital in Europe, because I think it's one of the big challenges. As you said, we have a lot of ideas, but we don't have that understanding of how to scale these companies, be it on the capital side, but also on the brand strategy side, to think, beyond these markets, to have the bold visions. And now today, more than ever, it seems like, capital is a big driver. And if you look at all the dry powder, I think the recent number was in the Bay Area alone, there are $250 billion dollars of dry powder that has not been deployed because there simply aren't promising cases. And if you look at now the challenges in the private equity market and how the market is changing at the moment, there's a lot of capital and there's a lot of movement. So I think now, being those big players, you could eat up whatever you want. So I think it becomes even more crucial, more important to have those deep pockets to be able to navigate. So I think it's a very important, and also from my viewpoint, a very good line of thought.
Yeah, no, I would agree with these statements. Yes, that's true.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Jan, it's fascinating to see. I have first time I started to look into IQM, I was like, wow, this is doesn't feel like European deep tech, and I mean that with the greatest respect. And also, I think I think you guys are one player that Europe can be proud of in a couple of years, and already are, of course. But I think this is a company that has the potential to really be a leader in a Northern Light star from Europe. And I think US is next. To round it up a little bit with circling back to our discussion on consciousness. So I just want to end on that because it's a topic that I spend a lot of time thinking about. What is it? I was curious for you as coming out of that science lab and working on the quantum computer. What do you think consciousness really is?
I'm not prepared for this question, but I think
you're always prepared for that question, that wine glass question. Just because we don't know, if you play with knowledge, you have to know your assumptions. There is no foundation to that question, probably.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, at least also personally, what matters a lot is that when you act consciously, there's basically certain purpose behind it. So you don't just do random things, but there is, at least in your head, there is a plan, and you try to follow this plan, and this plan gives you purpose and makes you feel good as a human. I think that's very important. And of course, everyone has different ways of feeling this purpose, and what is important for every individual is different. But I think consciousness for me means a lot in this direction, that we do things in the mindset that we're doing the right things, and it fulfills us and it gives us some meaning of life. I think this would be some angle that I would have to it.
Would you think we can crack it eventually with some technological approach and understand what it really is?
That's hard to say. Of course, I'm a scientist, and I believe in, let's say, laws of physics and other natural science. So there should be some explanation for it and some theory behind it. And just because we don't know yet doesn't mean that it's not existing. So from this perspective, I think probably at some point, yes, there are more scientific explanations for it.
So you think we'll crack it all? It's sort of like, do you know that story, whether it's true or not? It's a fun story about Niels Bohr. So Niels Bohr had a horseshoe over his door. You heard about that story?
No, I only heard the story that I think he founded his lab in the Carlsberg
Brewery. It might be invented, but it's a very good symbolic for that, what you just said. So Niels Bohr had a horseshoe, and horseshoes are supposed to be for luck, right? So the journalist someone came over and said, "Hey, Niels, why do you have that horseshoe hanging over your door? You don't believe in superstition and those type of things. I mean, you're a scientist. You shouldn't." And he said, "Yeah, obviously I don't. There is an explanation to everything. But the person that gave me this horseshoe said that it will work even though if I don't believe in it." So that's kind of sort of the narrative to how we are in today's world. So we should have scientists that believe everything explicable, but there's also good to have some weirdness and some absurdity in today's world. Again, Jan, thank you so much for spending so much time with me. It was truly great, and I always love our conversations. And I wish you all the best for your, growth path ahead and for IQM, and hope to see you in a physical space in the near future.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me. It was really great, really interesting discussion.